Yes, you can
Thank
go.
you. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Tara Duncan, and I'm the chair of Atlas. And I have the pleasure today to begin this webinar introducing our newest special interest group on the circular economy and circularity in the spaces of tourism and hospitality. Before I introduce you to our two moderators for today, let me tell you a little bit about Atlas. Atlas is the Association for Tourism and Leisure in Education and Research. We were established in 1991, so we're just over 30 years old. And basically our premise, our main aims are to promote teaching in tourism, hospitality and leisure, but also to encourage networking and collaboration across industry, across researchers and across students in tourism, hospitality and leisure. We have over 140 institute members across 60 countries globally, and we have active chapters in Africa, Latin America, Europe, Asia, Oceania, and the Middle East. We have 12 special interest groups, including cultural tourism, event tourism, business tourism, gastronomy and tourism, climate change and tourism, and of course this circular economy and circularity in space and tourism and hospitality is our newest special interest group. So today I'd like to introduce this new special interest group. We have over 90 registrations from 23 countries, so hopefully it'll be very well attended. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We're very excited to be launching this SIG today. Coordinated by Lucia Tomasini and Elena Cavagnaro from NHL Stenden University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And I'll be asking Lucia to take over for me in just a moment. This new special interest group is a timely addition to our existing special interest groups and illustrates the innovative and forward-thinking nature of where tourism research is going, and the engagement of tourism, hospitality and leisure scholars and practitioners from across the globe. I'm sure Lucia and Elena will say much more about what the special interest group is about. So it just remains for me to say congrats on introducing this highly relevant and important area to Atlas. And we are really looking forward to seeing what the group will do over the next few years. Lucia, over to you.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to organize this webinar to launch this special interest group. I'm Lucia Tomasini, and I'm here with my colleague, Professor Elena Cavagnaro from NHL Stenden, to shortly introduce this special interest group before going to a roundtable with four colleagues and academics that were to see the opportunities and constraints of circularity and circular economy in the space of tourism and hospitality. Shortly about myself, I'm a research lecturer at the Hotel Management School of NHL Stenden in the Netherlands, and I've been working here in establishing, together with Elena under her professorship, a research line in terms of circular economy in tourism and hospitality, how circular economy can be brought in, and which is the interplaying on how this paradigm can be used within hospitality and tourism, since, as we all may agree, and this can be part of the discussion in the roundtable or in the discussion with the audience, I mean, it's kind of circularity or circular economy was born with the idea of, with regard of product-oriented type of industry sector. So it's more clear to think what is circular when we think on a material, but what does it mean for a complex people-oriented sector like the one of tourism and hospitality? So this is why we think that this special interest group can contribute, can help us in the reflection and thinking along together. Part of our research has been in the direction of seeing to which extent circular economy can be thought in a social dimension, in a sort of perduring equilibrium that is more in terms of growth, is social inclusiveness, and much more. So in the sociological space of tourism, not just in the physical one. And this is where exactly we see this special interest group contributing. Before opening exactly to our speakers, I mean, just giving the floor to Elena. Elena, do you want to add anything on that?
Thank you, Lucia. No, actually, it was a very good introduction. I would just show you my face. Elena Cavagnaro, as Lucia was saying, I will be also the interlink between the people who are following us on YouTube and the colleagues who are in the panel. And just without further ado, I will be giving the floor back to Lucia for the start of this conversation, to which I'm looking forward very fondly. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Exactly. So happy to kick it off with our roundtable. Some practical information, as you may have seen from the program. The idea now is the program is about having a set of intervention. Giving different perspectives about which are the opportunities and constraints of circular economy in tourism and hospitalities, and then receiving question from the participants. You can type your question in the comments of the YouTube channel, and then the overall idea is to have a question and answer session at the end, unless there is something that maybe is worthwhile to comment before between the intervention. This is a bit the overall idea. And having said that, I will open up to the roundtable, sharing with our speakers broad question about how do they see or in which way they see the opportunities and constraints of circular economy in tourism and hospitalities on the basis of their own expertise, their own areas of research. So which are the open questions as well as the opportunities. And I will ask our colleague Joanna from Dalarna University to kick it off.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hi, Lucia. Thank you for inviting. Looking forward to some very interesting discussions here today. Hello, everyone from Dalarna, Sweden, and from the convenience of my home office and using this disruption that COVID created. And we are all very happy, I think, or to some extent with it, with the webinars. It makes the world such a smaller place. I would like to start. Let me first, I have a small PowerPoint that I could share with you. Just a second. And this is not exactly the PowerPoint, but it gives a nice picture anyway. So I would like to start by reflecting first on circular economy. And I wanted to share a very widely spread definition of circular economy. It's used widely from European Union. You can find it all over. And it's about, I'm sure several of you are familiar with it already, which is described circular economy as a model of production and consumption, which involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products as long as possible. And in this way, the life cycle of products is extended. And then I was reflecting on how this definition gets into tourism and how it has spread into tourism. And I remember attending a webinar regarding circular economy and tourism a few years ago. And then when the research so far and the literature was reviewed there on the webinar, it was very apparent, and that it's very understandable from the definition that it is a lot about recycling. It is a lot about energy and waste efficient, waste minimization, how to reuse. It's this 4R and how to add value based on that. However, in tourism, we talk about it's not a tangible product as it is described in this definition. It is a service. It is even more an experience, as we say nowadays. And one wonders, okay, how does this also get in the picture? Early, it was a lot about this waste reduction and energy. And then we had a lot of environmental management systems were in the picture. Eco-certification systems, refurbishing furniture, increasing recycling, for example, in hotels and other premises, or nowadays it's a lot about reducing food waste and so on. So one was wondering, like, okay, but that have been around in tourism even before the circular economy. Are we just repackaging that and calling it circular economy? What is new there, though? A new aspect there can be the sharing economy and how we can replace ownership by access and usage. sleep in your sofa, share goods which are available in-house already, like bicycles, beach or skiing equipment, or even equipment between partners, sharing equipment, not just between the host and the guest, but between partners as well. But one then wonders also, is this though a real transformation or just perpetuates our existing consumption patterns and just add a variation on that? And thus we're still on this very much pro-growth path. For example, Airbnb, which is very much on the sharing platform, these collaborative platforms or sharing platforms, has increased tourism in several, it has added more accommodation on top of the existing ones, and actually leading to over tourism in several destinations. Experience economy is also there. Tourism, as I said, it's about experiences. So there is a lot of discussion also how we can conceptualize circularity within experience economy. And it has a lot of potential there, how we can emphasize host-guest interactions and the co-creation of experiences with around circularity, and that shall have great potential. I shall get back to that. But for me, I think that what really caught my attention from my own research interest, and I started really looking closer to circularity, was when I ran onto this concept of degrowth and sustainable transformations. Degrowth, which is based on this contraction-based society where we should downsize production and consumption within the limits of natural resources. It includes other things like the colonization of development, for example, and basically how we can empower the possibility of alternatives to the dominant growth paradigm. And although we can track back the roots of the growth movement or understanding, or as a growthism, someone might refer it to, we can track it back to the early political and social ecology, as well as early ecological economics of the 60s and the 70s. But it was basically in the mid of 2000, 2007 or so, that Latouche launched the term, and then it attracted a lot of attention. And what it really brings into and invites is that we can radically reconsider production and consumption patterns, basically, and we can make that with more different ways than just only eco-efficiency. So the first part with around reducing, recycling, waste management, waste reduction, and energy efficiency, it's a lot about, one could argue, a lot around aspects of eco-modernization, actually, ecological modernization, and how we can continue with our growth, but green growth, but that just adds up. And the growth brings a different understanding onto that. And close to that, it's also the sustainable, the growth mandate transformation in the system regarding including political, social, and other structural changes. And there we can talk about also sustainable transformations, which are about the change in society's values and practices regarding sustainability. And again, like the growth, we can talk about sustainable transformations as something which can result from policies and intentional actions, and to bring change in the systems, or changes that emerge from more unruly from social movements and grassroots innovation. So, for example, we can talk for sustainable transformations from a structural perspective approach, emphasizing political and economic structures and the needs for change on those structures, or from systemic approaches where we emphasize interactions, resilience, and learning. And there are the enabling approaches, which can include aspects of both, but basically emphasize capacities that empower individuals and communities to take action on their own behalf. And that brings another understanding onto a sustainable transformation from a more social perspective, so a social approach, as empathetic understanding and cultivating an ethic of care. Emergence, diversity, tacit embodied social knowledge with often unknown ends are part of these enabling approaches to transformations. For me, both the growth and sustainable transformations, besides this eco model, which I don't want to underestimate, we need these technological innovations as well. We do need to become more efficient into reducing waste, recycling, and all those aspects. But I think we need very much, and that is kind of how I understand also the opportunity for circularity within these social approaches, I see a lot of emphasis there on these emancipatory caring approaches and processes around the growth, transformations, and the circularity. So I see a lot of opportunities there, circularity, when it aligns with this, aligns with sustainable transformations and regrowth, and those theoretical frameworks to inform our understanding of circular economy. We can talk about theoretical contributions there to advance understanding and conceptualizations, but also more practical, and that's very important, more practical research also around business models for circularity, or stories and mediation around the co-creation and meaning of experiences that are based to circular models of production and consumption. A lot around entrepreneurship aspects can be there, action research, of course, and of course social approaches which look on grassroots in more unruly developed circularity, which I think is really important with the newer generation. I have a kid, he's 12 now, and I mean the new generation, they're not linear in their understanding as we are. They understand the world in a very different way. So I think a lot of these approaches which look on more this unruly developed circularity, grassroots innovation, social and civil movements, I think have for me a great potential. And of course there are challenges, and one of the challenges I think emanates from the sometimes the ambiguity of the circular economy, which has on one very big leg of this eco-modernization approaches, but then it's very closely aligned with the growth and sustainable transformation. So I think we need more conceptual clarity there on how we see circular economy in tourism, actually, and that of course emanates also from the very same nature of tourism, as I said earlier, as a service and an experience, basically, rather than a product. And furthermore, it's an experience which comprises of several other products spread out in space. So that is a challenge that we need to address, and basically we need to look more onto context-specific studies and how we can work bottom up, basically, on these social approaches. And yeah, I think that's what I had to say for now. Thank you very much.
Well,
looking forward for the rest.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for this intriguing, let's say, overview of all the touching points or the interplay where circularity can play a role, or how it can connect to a number of topics. Maybe I'm asking Elena if there is any urgent question from the chat, or we move to our second speaker.
There is not yet a very urgent question from the chat, so I guess we can move and leave this conversation for later. Thank you, Lucia.
Okay, thank you. And then I will give the floor to Flemming Sorensen. And thank you, Flemming, and the floor is yours, exactly for.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to raise two issues, I think. One is the role of us as researchers, and the other one is the role of the tourist. And I'll start with the last one, because that kind of follows the lead of Joanna's presentation. if we go all the way back to the original model of circular economy in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation report, the role of the user in the model is actually quite evident. And also in the definition that Joanna showed before, it said that circular economy is a model of production and consumption. So it's not only production, it's also consumption. So the consumption side is actually quite crucial. But it seems that the user is mostly in research and also in practice approached as a recipient of different products and services, rather than actually a user of those with certain responsibilities. But users have different responsibilities, of course, or impacts on the circularity of a production system, for example, in relation to product lifetime and product use and the closing of material loops and so on. This is particularly interesting, of course, in tourism, as Joanna also indicated, because tourists are co-producers or co-creators of their own experiences, and they even sometimes produce their tourist experiences all on their own, for example, when going on a micro-adventure camping in the nearby forest. So in many ways, tourism can perhaps be seen as an experimentarium of how users are or can be involved in a transformation of production systems into a circular economy. Then there are probably different theoretical angles to kind of attack that. But from my desk where I sit, with the research that I'm doing, I can see two, I think, interesting theoretical approaches to this. One is the service dominant logic approach, which sees the tourist or the consumer in general, the user, as a value creator and a co-creator of value, and not only a co-creator of value, but also a resource integrator, so that you are, as a user, actually perceived as being part of the production system, because companies resource integrate, but so does the user. And also, service dominant logic says that users and producers create mutual value, so it's kind of a mutual coexistence between producers and users. So users are part of the system, and in that sense, they would also be part of co-creating the transition to the circular economy. The other interesting approach, I think, is practice theory, where we don't perhaps look at innovation so much in things or in services, but more in innovations of what people do and how people do things. It focuses on the change of habits, on why we do things, the teleoaffective structures that kind of guides our practices, the knowledge that is important for how we use products, how we do different practices, and of course also the available resources are important for what we do and how we do it. And then the last thing that is interesting in this respect is related to also what Joanna said about, for example, the sharing economy, because practice theory also talks about bundles of practices, that practices are not individually independent from each other. They are bundled in chains of practices. So, for example, in the sharing economy, if we rent an Airbnb apartment, that practice will typically be related to a number of other practices. So even if we think or conclude that renting or Airbnb apartment is a more circular economy relevant way of accommodation, then that practice is typically connected with a number of other practices, and that entire practice chain will not be relevant or very circular economy sufficient. So it's these bundles and how they are connected that actually becomes interesting, and the reasons for why we connect things the ways we do. In that sense, and if we kind of use both of these theories, I think we can say something about the role of tourists, not only in selecting and using products, but also in combining them, and how tourists integrate resources and create mutual value in the system together with the system, how the change of habits might be important, or how changing habits can be achieved, and in essence, how tourists are part of co-creating the circular economy, and a very important actor in doing that, an integrated actor in the system. And I think that's very important to realize that, so that we don't focus too much on the provision of services that has to be attractive for the user and the provision of products, but actually understands the tourist as a very important and relevant actor in this transition. Now, the other aspect I wanted to raise was the role of research, the role of us as researchers. If you do a quick research on sustainability and tourism, you get more than 20,000 articles published on sustainability and tourism, directly or indirectly dealing with that. But if you look at tourism, it's still not sustainable. So what is the impact of all that research? It can somehow be hard to identify, and that all perhaps is also resulting in this increasingly loud call from researchers for action, but for action from the providers, from politicians, from planners, and so on. So one issue or one cause of this might be that the concept of sustainability is very complex, even fuzzy at times, and it's complex to apply in practice. And when it's applied, it's mainly based primarily, it's the economy and the economic sustainability that is guiding for the sustainability approaches in general. This circular economy, in that sense, is a much more focused approach. I think, of course, it leaves aside the social and the not the economic, but the social aspects. But this focus actually makes it much more relevant for providing guidance and for providing directions on how to achieve sustainability and how to implement sustainability. So one solution to the problem of the hard to see impact of tourism research is to perhaps emphasize the concept of circular economy more, which we are doing right now. The other thing, however, is perhaps also has something to do with the methodological approaches of our research. In sustainability research, the approach is dominantly descriptive, analytical, and based on traditional data collection, case studies, and also full of conceptual debates. And it leads mainly to suggested practical implications rather than actual practical implications. I think what is needed, and that is needed in sustainability research, but it's also needed in circular economy research, but perhaps it's easier to apply in circular economy research, is a much more practice-oriented and engaged research, applying action research, interactive research, participatory research methods, and so on, that actually develops in the research, develops solutions in collaboration with the relevant actors. So we actually create change and we show the way forward, and we develop solutions that are actually possible to implement in practice. So I think these are the two issues that I find interesting in relation to circular economy, as how to actually consider the role of the tourist, how to facilitate the integration of the tourist more in the transition towards circular economy, and then also looking a bit at ourselves and asking ourselves, if we really want to make an impact with our research, how can we then perhaps better achieve this? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Flemming. That was another interesting contribution to let us think further and reflect, and also in terms of in which direction this special interest group can go. I mean, it seems, as you said, there is not yet, let's say, a lot. There is not yet a lot research or done, and not in terms of impactful research. So thanks for your inputs. Just touching down with Elena, if there is anything from the chat, otherwise we move on exactly to the third speaker. We can move on, right? Yeah, okay. So thank you, Flemming, and I will give the floor to Rodolfo.
Good afternoon. So I have mixed feelings. On one side, I've never been very fond of importing in tourism concepts that were born in other areas, because this often leads to a series of misunderstanding or forcing concepts that were not naturally developed, and so on. On the other hand, I find the field very fascinating, probably because I saw a paper of some years ago was citing more than 100 different definitions of circular economy. So there's room for everything, practically. And this typically attracts me, trying to understand better what is the real meaning of the whole matter. Partially responding to Fleming, and also probably to Joanna. Fleming was saying that we should guarantee a more relevant impact in what we do. But I think that until we try to put together a sound theoretical framework for these matters, we cannot really have any possibility to have practical outcomes and practical application of the things. For what concerns the whole thing, I think that probably, at least from my point of view, the most important and interesting side is the social side of the whole matter. The social side, which is typically a bit forgotten, even in the, let's say, general field of sustainability and so on. All widely cited, because every work or every paper or every discussion you hear on sustainability, the social and the economic side are always cited, but then very little explored in depth, probably because it's a bit more difficult than talking about the effects on the climate or waste management or something like that. But I think it's a fundamental thing, because as also Joanna was remarking, tourism is not a production industry, so it's a service industry. So, I mean, the circular, the reuse and recycling of what? I mean, we cannot recycle tourists. I mean, that's it. But jokes apart, I think that the social aspects are fundamental for us, at least mainly in this period after what we've seen in the last couple of years. There are also a couple of other things that I think is important. One is to focus very well on the role of technologies, because they can help not only in, let's say, physical activities, but also for what technology, mainly now with the recent developments on artificial intelligence and so on, can help us to better focus and better understand, and probably better finding tools for facing the different challenges we have. And from a more, let's say, production, if I can say, if I can use this word, side, I think that one of the activities we could well explore is the structure and the functioning of the different supply chains that exist in our field. Because this is probably the way to better understand how to improve circularity in a wider context. And also because examining deeply how the different things are, the different suppliers are connected, will allow us to widen a bit the perspective. One of the things I've always noticed in our domain is that mostly we tend to consider tourism as a kind of isolated, as a kind of an island, a bit disconnected from the rest. While I think we should definitely consider tourism more as well embedded in the today's economies and societies. So my idea of embarking in a series of activities, mainly for researching, because that's what I do, is just to try to deepen a bit these two areas with some in-depth consideration, and not only with, as Fleming was citing, with descriptive or conceptualized generic ideas on what the different aspects can be. That's my point of view.
Okay, thank you for this other perspective. I can see exactly that. I mean, we are enriching the debate about what can be, what cannot be, what should be, or maybe not. Exactly. I think it's part of the of the launching this, I mean, group reflecting on exactly what can be and what cannot. So thank you, Rodolfo, for your contribution. Yeah, I think exactly it seems if I don't hear anything from Helena, I would imagine that exactly we can move on with our last intervention, last but not least, to conclude this round of perspectives, and then open up the discussion to the audience if there are questions or among all of us. So, Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I hope the technology works. Also, I made some considerations to share about opportunities and challenges, constraints. I think there are many opportunities, at least in terms of paradigmatical aspects, philosophical aspects, methodological aspects, praxeological aspects, ethical aspects, and then I come to talk to constraints. The paradigmatical, I think the entire topic is well embedded in the field of transformative tourism science, tourism of hope, and so that we try and could try to align the concept of circularity to this type of, or it is an example of transformative tourism. When it comes to concrete reasons why it is transformative, because it empowers the region. It's a kind of de-globalization or regionalization. It lifts socio-ecological impact, what we often could not see with sustainability aspects when washed out in the neoliberal globalized economy, of course. It should empower locals, local institutions, local structures when it comes to banks, cooperative, credit-based banks, sufficiency economy, steady state economy. All that aspects can well be related to the economy aspect of the circular economy notion. Obviously, there is the very old notion of oikonomia, where Aristotle mentioned the creative craftsman who uses money just to buy products, to craft a better product out of it, where of course the krematistike is considered as the salesman who applies money to get more money out of it, which turns out to become today's investment model, which is so much a misery, and therefore might also this circular economy be a hope of do other better good economy, which also leads to a different type of describing such economic models, to a non-mechanist phenomenological approach, thick description, as we all know, which then also might lead to de-alienate economic agency by freeing it from investors' speculative hopes, subsumed, which needs to be said, by a militarized political power. We know that most economies we admire couldn't even exist without military power. Money as an exchange mean and not a means of accumulation. This is also something which in tourism science so far has never been analyzed. And I think this fivefold violence of money could be theorized and studied also in circular economic context, where money becomes much more of a social form of exchange and not as a mean of ontological end and accumulation goal, endless goal. By the way, here I don't go into depth, but it can easily be shown that prices are never in any kind of equilibrium, that doesn't even exist. It is mathematically, but also logically untenable and impossible, that the idyll of a self-regulating market equilibrium is a pure ideological invention. Philosophical, I think, to take the ecology as a rule model instead of a life science, to having a science of life, is very important. I cite Wittgenstein, who said, we feel that even if all possible scientific questions are answered, the problems of life have still not been touched at all. And this is important, since this also our knowledge is something which is a social, a circle is circular, knowledge is circular by nature because it creates social reality. Social reality is its actuality of knowledge as a process of action and communication. And I think this Cartesian separation of the idea as the objective idea and the subject opinion, fact-value dichotomy, as we all know, should also be, could also be surpassed and overcome to a post-Cartesian non-dual ontology of tourism, where here the doing and knowing and believing is one good, and when it comes to impact, we said before, what should we do? It is also important to show what we should do less. Very often we try to do more, but I think by showing how a circular economy would successfully work by doing less. This is very important, by using philosophies showing and the letting things go and doing just the minimum, the optimum, and not that what is supposed to be done to create the maximum of profitability. This is very important. Methodological, I think here is the largest scientific gap, since majority of the literature is conceptual. As Rodolfo already said, supply chain analysis is important. I totally agree. One possibility could be to use regionalized input-output coefficients, and then to do analysis by intersectoral linkages, leakages, if so to speak, the money remains in the region. This is a good sign. Exportation, importation share, taxation multipliers contributing to public good for creating welfare to the commons. That all are signs hinting to a growing circular economy. Then it's also possible to do network analysis with these regionalized input-output coefficients, to use the nodes, the sectors as nodes, and the input-output coefficients as weighted links in a reduced graph analysis, and then identify strongly interlinked, structurally equivalent sectors, and then they also can be identified as those sectors which most strongly contribute to the generation of circular economies. By the way, together with Rodolfo and postdoc at Mitzvah University, we found out that the creative sectors, arts and entertainment, are the sectors most strongly interlinked with the regional economy. However, since 2010, they show negative development trends. So this interconnection becomes weaker and weaker over time. And then also something which Rodolfo has done alone and once with me is the analysis of network closure and structural holes, which is also an important symptom or sign, hint, empirical hint to show adequate topological structures for well collaborating, although different seeds of knowledge areas tied together through brokerage, and that also might be an interesting approach to identify areas which are favoring idea generation and the birth and diffusion of creative mindsets. And there is an interesting network metric called Similian brokerage, which could also be used more often also in the context of circular economies. From a praxeological perspective, then I come very soon to the end. It's of course important to identify which sectors are most adequate and interesting to push the circular economy idea from obviously local food producers and tourism, crafts, creative sectors, empowered accommodation, Airbnb and things like that. But then we also should think which firms, obviously micro, small and medium sized, but also which leaders, what kind of leadership theories, what kind of critical economic philosophy should they have learned or learn, and do we contribute enough? Are we critical enough? If we don't teach the distinction between revenue and profit, or if we are critical to lifestyle entrepreneurship. So we should, of course, demystify individual entrepreneurial risk, rather show the social relevance and contribution to social welfare and to the commons of each supplier and producer. So maybe also the communication-based theory of entrepreneurship would find a wonderful base in the or alignment in within the idea of circular economy, where it's all about social perception, social adaptability, social expressiveness, and social ingratiation of others. And finally, which has already been said by Fleming, the consumer, we should even kind of transcend the idea of consumer, because a tourist is already a highly ideologized concept. Responsible visitor, no marketing actually might be needed, if any socio-ecological marketing. So I could imagine a world without marketing, then less lies would be around. And local which institutions, local associations of interest, not national or supranational capital interest driven. This is also an important aspect, that local associations really supporting the local economy. Ethical, of course, strengthening democratic principles, socioeconomic autonomy, participatory planning, weakening global dependencies, which during COVID has been highly and strongly emphasized. Sovereignty of essentials, especially food sovereignty, has been discussed, but now not so often anymore. And constraints, too few well implemented examples may be identified, or even not well phenomenologically understood, described and published. That might be a constraint. And as often, like with the sustainability and green movement, it could be washed out by political and industrial propaganda, but also by academia supporting the neoliberal world model, degenerating the concept as a mere marketing label without any or only very little impact on the good. Therefore, a self-critical scientist is much in need when laboring with this concept. Thank you so much, Lucia.
Finding the bottom. Thank you very much, Matthias, also for this other interesting intervention, concluding a bit our roundtable on different perspective, opportunities, constraints, and element of reflection about what can be or what we should look at circular economy being such a broad, let's say, unexplored concept when it comes to tourism and sustainability, so tourism and hospitality, and not just that. Just reaching out, Elena, if there are any questions from the chat. Otherwise, I'm sure that we have questions to be shared among us. At least I have few of them. But Elena, there are any questions from the chat? From the YouTube?
Not yet. I guess that we have to give a good example. And if you don't mind us being here, I would like to start this conversation because I found it very interesting that actually Matthias was closing his intervention, kind of coming back to a point that was also shared at the beginning of our conversation by Joanna. And that is this challenges and opportunity of a paradigmatic shift that the circular economy as a concept in general and also applied in tourism and hospitality brings, but also the challenge into it because it may be kind of kidnapped again by this growth, the idea of never-ending growth, such as we have seen it done partially at least in the sustainability debate. So I would like actually to ask all our panelists to reflect back to this opportunity and challenges in the paradigmatic shift. So what could we do also as a SIG Atlas group to reinforce the positive paradigmatic shift? So this idea of localization, of strengthening the social structure, etc., in face of the danger that circular economy is going to be kidnapped by this growth thinking that is a big component of our society, the way we relate also to tourism. So that would be my challenge to start the conversation again on this opportunities and challenges in the paradigmatic shift, of course, circular economy in general applied to tourism and hospitality in particular. I don't know if there is anybody who would like to jump into it. I called on a little bit of Matthias and Joanna because they were pointing to that very openly, but it was in all of the interventions. So that's why I would like to bring it back.
Thank you, Elena, for your question. And I think at this point, if you will all agree, we can all have our camera on since we enter in a more colloquial phase of our webinar. I give the floor to the ones who feel like to pick or to react on the question of Elena.
I don't know, perhaps I didn't get the question right, but I don't think it's a question of being hijacked or if it's a question of either growth or non-growth or degrowth. I think in a sense, there's room for many different approaches in the circular economy. As long as the end result of what is being done is in line with the basic idea of circular economy, the limitation of the use of resources and the reuse of products so I'm not afraid, at least for if it's being hijacked by some, as long as the basic principles are not ignored. But I don't know, perhaps it was a bit of another argument you had, Matthias.
But this is probably the argument that basic principles can always be basic. And the same was actually what happened with the sustainability discourse, where now the label of sustainability is put to nearly everything, as long as it is sellable to the longest supply chains over the world. And still it is said, yeah, but for this basic principle, it can be said it is sustainable. And also for this, and therefore we put the label. So there might be a reason or a very good argument to see something where the circular economy might outperform this, not in economic terms, but in socio-economic terms, the neoliberal model, since it is inherently asymmetric and destructive. And I think that is something we all agree. And therefore we should here, as opponents of the circular economy, be a little bit more kind of protective and say we should look more on the micro micro or small-sized economy, which is more human-centered, less exportation-oriented, and less profit-oriented, and more lifestyle-oriented, and all that types. I think that was the basic direction of the question. And what could be done, I suppose, like a little bit with artificial intelligence, to avoid that students write or let write their assignments by artificial intelligence, where the first slide they might even look smarter. As long as we contextualize them into a very concrete context and ask about the social ethics, then it is always good to see what the contribution to do it better than the current economies is doing. So I think we should not trust too much in the current contemporary economic thinking model and practice. That, in my view, wouldn't be good.
Thank you for. Oh, yeah, no, I'm not muted.
No,
Thank
I'm
you
done,
for.
I'm done. Sorry.
No, exactly. I was not sure if I was muted or not. Since actually all this, your intervention and made me think something that I would like to share with you, and maybe and then I see that Joanna and Elena have raised your hand. So if I will just share something with you, and then I will give the floor to Joanna and then again to Elena. Since what I found it interesting, at the same time challenging in, let's say, what we have been doing so far here, and we are based in Leeuwarden, that is Friesland, that is a region that has put at its political agenda a transition to circular economy with the ambition of becoming one of the most circular territory of Europe. And it is also in consistency with the national agenda. But then, as we all agree, there is a kind of gap in what can be in theory and what can be achieved in practice. Since, for instance, one of the line of intervention that we are trying to explore is how hospitality facilities can be sort of micro hubs of upcycling and recycling processes. And this clashes a lot with regulations. So there is a gap in regulation. Maybe I should not call it a gap, but this touches in regulation that are not yet there to allow this type of waste management. So I think exactly in the way in which we have been exploring circularity, at least at conceptual, more conceptual theoretical lines, is this idea of a principle of order, equilibrium, so maybe more agrowth than degrowth. Then we can argue that tourism imply mobility, so the zero impact and the agrowth is not really there when we think on tourism. But when we think on hospitalities, at least in terms of facilities, what this can be, and we, for instance, ended up in a number of legal bottleneck or maybe area of investigation. So it's not neither a question, but something to be shared with you, and I guess can be related to practice, to network theory, to supply chain, since where maybe there is this desire towards zero waste or circularity, but on, I don't know, to say operational level, there are not the tools yet, or not so much. And this was something that I wanted to share with you, but shall I go first to Joanna? And I didn't realize who raised the hand first, but
I think
Joanna.
It's Elena first, so please.
Elena is giving me input to give the floor first to you, so we'll follow. Elena.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was thinking about this, the question that Elena posed, and then also the discussion so far. And if we stay with this term of kidnapping or hijacking, I think we are hijacking the term of circularity, because initially it was very much within this eco-modernization and technological innovations, which were like, okay, how can we continue with what was named green growth? So we are trying rather to hijack that and bring in a different understanding. And how I came around there is I come from sustainability with all the burden it carries and the ambiguity of the term and so on. But for me, sustainability invites for some consideration of limits to growth. You cannot talk about sustainability with unlimited growth. And when we bring in this aspect that there might be limits to growth, then not the limits of natural resources, of the Anthropocene, of whatever you call it, social limits, you call it, then I think degrowth or non-growth or agrowth comes very much naturally in when you dig in and on the very first texts of ecological economics around the steady state economy and what does it mean and so on. I think kind of those aspects of how can we, the growth as basic, and then there is a lot of discussion how each society or each community can embrace and relate to the concept. But to me, it's a lot about inviting for this reconsideration of our production and consumption, because of course green growth, it's fantastic and it does bring results in terms of reducing carbon emissions per capita. But I mean, if we're more and more who consume and who have the BRIC countries and middle class spreads, and it's, I mean, of course they should develop, but we are not, but then of course then we should all include in ourselves, not just the new emerging economies, to consider, okay, can we continue consuming like that? And then production comes along with. So, and I think we have very nicely touched both sides of production and consumption within these discussions of, which I think we kind of more align with this, the growth or whatever limits discussion.
Thank you, Joanna. I think I will go with Elena. That I suspect there is also a question in the chat, exactly. But yeah, exactly. I will let Elena, and then we go to Rodolfo. But please, Elena.
There is indeed a question of the chat. That is a nice, I think, link also to what Joanna was saying at the end. Thank you very enough, Joanna, to remind us all that we're also kind of using a concept that was not developed in the leisure tourism and hospitality domain. I totally agree. Limits to growth is essential, both concept, and the moment we realize there is a limit, also the big question, social question about sharing the limited resources in a fair way come in, and that was also part of our conversation. But at the end of your intervention, Joanna, at this one, the last one, you were quoting again this production and consumption, and that is exactly where the question from the audience is coming in. So I would like to give for a moment the floor through me to Anna Catarina Gomes, who has a question in general for all of us, but particularly for Fleming, for Professor Sørensen, because it's about the user. And the question is whether we think that the visitor has an influence on the implementation of circularity processes by tourist companies and supply agents. So it's a question about influence and power relations, I guess. And I will give it back to us to reflect on this question by Anna Catarina. Thank you, by the way, for asking this question to us.
Yeah, thank you to Anna Catarina. And what do you think? Shall I give the floor to Fleming, since she mentioned more specifically Fleming for this question, and then we go to Rodolfo, if we all agree. Fleming, I give the floor back to you.
Yeah, I'll just question. See if I can answer very briefly. I don't really have a good answer. I think the answer is that yes, at least it's possible for the tourist to be an influencer but to what degree it actually happens, I'm more in doubt of that. I think we see, just as we may see trends in that direction, but we also see, you could say, trends in the other direction. I mean, people are still going on short trip shopping tours to other capitals in Europe, for example, by plane. And there's I think there's kind of an understanding of that we have almost a human right to do that, and that as a tourist we think it's not our responsibility, that it is actually the system that should change production patterns. But we also, of course, see the trend of increasing amounts of segments that actually do influence the system by behaving in different ways and by consuming products that are environmentally sustainable and consuming them in ways that are environmentally sustainable. So it happens, but I can't say if it's very evident or quantitatively very important. I don't think, not in the big picture. It's not a change maker at the moment. I think that's the best answer I can give.
Thank you, Fleming. We hope that exactly, and Katerina got anyway some further elements of reflection, or the question is, or the answer is, in any case, exactly, well, I think a good answer to prompt further reflection. So I will give the floor to Rodolfo at this stage, and then to Joanna.
Yeah, mine is a consideration about what both Johan and Matthias were saying, because as Matthias knows, I am fully convinced that first of all, we need to revisit the concept of growth, because we need to understand what we mean by growth today. And this, I think, cannot but pass through a profound reconsideration of what are the current paradigms, mainly in the economic world. We've seen, I mean, I work in Bocconi. I'm not an economist, but I frequently discuss with economists. And one thing I always found is that the economic, that is a strange field in which they put their models on top of everything, even when the reality shows that their models are not working anymore. And so we definitely need to reconsider all this part. We've seen in the last 15, 20 years, a lot of examples, starting from the crisis of 2008, starting from the disruption on the global markets and logistics of the last few years. Now we still have one more big, risks to be a big new crisis on the financial system and so on. So we definitely need to reconsider this, mainly if we want to be effective in our field. And this cannot pass also by, in my opinion, from also a change and a transformation in the way we analyze things. We cannot use standard and outdated methods, the usual things and so on. We need to find different ways to better understand what our systems are and how they work, what is their structure, and what is the impact of the structure of these systems on the functionalities of the different parts and so on. Partly is what I've been doing in the last years, as some of you know. But I think there is much room for improvement in finding new ways of thinking about the challenges we have. If we just look around, there is an incredible series of possibilities that are being developed in many other fields that can be useful for better understanding these things. But I definitely think that we need to change the attitude toward these problems. Otherwise, we keep saying always the same thing. Then after a while, they become trivial because.
Thank you for your intervention. I will give the floor to Joanna. I see that she has.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I want to go back to what Anna Katarina asked, and then we're making circles in this discussion of circular economy. And also how Fleming replied also. And I was thinking a lot about, not a lot, but about this co-creation and how does it get into the picture of circular economy. And because of my research and my background in like Rodolfo in complex adaptive systems, I'm very much interested in their relationships and links and connections, and I'm very much interested in looking on what bridges also things. And if I look back on our early interventions from everyone here and the question around this co-creation. For example, also Matthias was bringing up the issue of You mentioned, Matthias, about how it is located within transdisciplinary research and the importance of transformative research there, which I would very much agree. And then there were also voices about how Fleming was talking about making an impact and action research, which very much is part of this. And what I was saying also about sustainable transformation in this enabling approach, which basically epistemologically invites very much for critical reflective approaches, co-creation of knowledge and engaged scholarship. I think it would put co-creation in the middle of the attention. It doesn't need, I don't mean that should be the center of the attention in circular economy, but now what we are discussing. There is one aspect of co-creation, not co-creation of the experience and therefore of the meaning and value and understanding of the experience with circularity in around, and that invites, of course, from the value propositions from businesses together with the tourists, and it has to do a lot with the tourists, host guests interaction there. But there is also a co-creation aspect when it comes to co-creation of knowledge, so how researchers together with the supply maybe side, what I was talking about, entrepreneurship, and Matthias was mentioning that as well, how a co-creation of knowledge and other these collaborative methods, transformative research also there. So maybe we can, co-creation is a term that can be used, I think we have seen it a lot around the co-creation of experiences, has a role in circularity, but we can talk also about co-creation of knowledge in more disengaged scholarship and transformative research approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. I go to Fleming.
So I'll just make a comment now. The topic is up again about the methods. I'm perfectly aware that there's not a one size fits all here. And of course, if we're looking at the deep-rooted structures of systems, then we don't go around experimenting with them or do action research. But on the other hand, I would also say if we have to wait until we have this firm theoretical framework before we go out and actually induce or engage with the practitioners, then we can wait another 40 or 50 years before we all agree on what the right theoretical framework is. And perhaps it's my approach from business studies and the easy, access to actually working with businesses that makes me look at research the way I do and look at the importance of engaged research at that more visible level of analysis, you could say. And I will also just say that with engaged research or proactive research or whatever we would like to call it, I don't think it's about applying our knowledge in, for example, companies. It is about co-creating, as Joanna said, co-creating knowledge with those that we investigate and develop solutions with those. And that knowledge and those solutions are also input to our theory development. So I think the idea is that it's a co-development or co-creation of new knowledge when we work closely with the practitioners. So it's not applying what we already know, really, not the way I see it, at least.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fleming. I saw that before there was a hand raised from Rodolfo, but I think it's not anymore. So I will move to Matthias. You had the hand raised, but you... And then Elena.
Yes, I had it raised. I gladly provide feedback to what has been said so far. I very much liked Fleming's statement about it's not necessarily a big game changer. I think this is a bit of a disease of the generalizability envy, so to speak, of science, to always try to find the framework. We all trained in Western science, which is especially hindering in the social sciences, because there is not the one valid framework. And therefore, I would highly appreciate such small but well understood, conceptually well understood, phenomenologically, hermeneutically, interpretatively, action research type, and less from a complexity type. Why do I say that? Because complexity science objectifies the human. So the human is just an object of study, a node in a network and whatsoever. But if extended to a, so to speak, hermeneutical communicative relationship, then it might be possible to really understand very well. And what also has been said, this degrowth, I think the post-growth and all the anti-growth, this is of course from the limit, the natural limits we are surrounded, obvious, and the necessity, so to speak, to avoid negative effects of producing more with more efficient technology. I think it is important to distinguish between a benevolent and a malevolent type of competition and economizing, where the revenue is not the same as profit. Profitability is always considered the most which can be gained, and revenue is that what is considered beyond all the social, ethical, local aspects, family aspects, lifestyle aspects, and these things can also, or should ideally, play a strong consideration. They play already a strong role today in the life, but not in the science. This is the point. And when it comes to knowledge creation and frameworks in general, I also would say that there is no difference between knowledge embedded in a framework or implemented in action. Just is the question by whom, with which guidance. And so there is always this unity of circularity, as I said before, of knowledge, that it becomes real through social action and communication, but it is always already taught and hermeneutically understood. So there is no distinction between knowing and utilizing or seeing an advantage. Seeing an advantage and a utility, the utilitarian idea is already a very specific form of knowledge. Therefore, also here, a kind of transcendence of these principles I see when we talk about sufficiency economy, which is part of circular economy very strongly. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. I go to Elena. I see that she has.
Thank you, Lucia. First of all, I would like to bring back the thanks of Katarina, Anna Katarina, who says that she's very thankful to us because we approached the question with such interesting concepts, so broadening your field of thinking. And then I would like to stress this component, I liked very much in the discussion also in all three, the stressing of collaboration in research. Lucia and I, we also do a lot of research with businesses, so try to be collaborative and participative with all the challenges of it, both in making this practical and also in terms of then, for example, disseminating the results of the research. But that is not what I would like to have it now, but more maybe that as a special interest group in circular economy, we could make a case for setting at the center of our methodological approach collaborative research and connected with this supply chain analysis that also Rodolfo and Matthias were bringing to the table, and offer also kind of, stage to this type of research. So we have the opportunity to have a track also in the other conference. We may maybe in the future think about special issues, and I guess it would be really good if we could reach out to colleagues applying those methodology and offer them a stage for it. So kind of, making a claim in terms of what we wish to promote. Maybe too bold for the moment, but sometimes we Italian, we tend to be bold.
Thank you. And I think exactly this is also, so to say, nice way to, I don't want to say to try to go toward a conclusion probably of this webinar with a positive note and with a kind of, let's say, roadmap for future possibilities. And with regard to that, since we are exactly, bit more than 5 minutes to the end, let's say, wonder if there are any other questions, either from the participant through the YouTube channel or here in the audience. Any other points or consideration to be stressed before heading to our conclusion in this launching webinar for this special interest group. So opening to all of you, if you have any points or remark or other elements to be stressed at this point. No, probably not, exactly. So I think we can, first of all, from my side, and I think I can speak also on behalf of Elena, thank you very much to the four of you for being here with us. Thank you to Atlas, Leontina, and Tara for being with us today to make this webinar happening, and also for your enthusiasm and ideas about what can be and what we can do. And I think this is the beginning, hopefully, of something that is going to be continued through other activities, hopefully projects, publications, special track, debates, and hoping to involve in the debate also industry representative or any other type of stakeholder to avoid a situation in which we speak among us as academics, exactly, and we also have a more maybe common language, but we all know that working with other partners imply other languages under other paces and so on and so forth. So I don't know if any of you has something to add. Otherwise, exactly, to me is a big thank you to everybody, and hoping to meet in person for the ones join the Atlas conference in Austria, or anyway, we keep in touch for sure. So it's a big thank you, and also I wish for a nice weekend. Seems after all it's Friday afternoon. Okay, I think exactly we can say that exactly this is the end.
Thank you, Lucia, for hosting this webinar. I think it's been quite interesting, and sharing ideas is always a nice thing to do.
Thank you. And thank you for thinking along with me, since I always found a very enthusiastic reaction when I reached the four of you. And exactly, so I hope we can keep on thinking along for this special interest group. Happy to embrace exactly. And also to the participants that register for this webinar, thank you for showing such an interest in this topic. This is a confirmation that is a topic that needs to be discussed and explored. I know there was a high number of people that registered for this webinar. They will receive the link, so they will look at the recording of it. And I hope we can meet in person in the conference. Anyway, feel free to reach us out. About this topic, would be nice thinking along together also with all of you that are in different countries, different contexts, with different backgrounds, and I'm sure we can benefit from that. Okay. Thank you.
You're right.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.